Pushed out of downtown San Diego, hundreds of homeless camps in the city, leaders demanding action to help this population.
It's difficult to go to sleep every night knowing that your brother died in the pain that he died in, that he didn't have to.
Keeping his brother's memory alive, the foundation that calls for police reform after the death of Alfred Olango. And construction begins on test designs for the president's border wall project, the new rules that could challenge people who want to protest it. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. The deadly hepatitis A outbreak continues to get worse in San Diego. Today, county public health officials reported 461 confirmed cases with 17 deaths. The city has now set up 63 hand washing stations and 22 restroom sites. The newest is at Tailgate Park. One homeless person KPBS caught up with says he thinks bathrooms are a good idea, but says homeless people have much bigger problems than the disease to worry about.
I mean, it is dirty down here. It's filthy, so people are getting sick all the time. People are more worried about being malnourished. There's people literally starving down here. You've got a lot of people in this community that have mental illness, drug addiction, things like that. It's easy to scapegoat us.
County Health Services says 63% of confirmed cases are with homeless and illicit drug users. They say they have vaccinated more than 42,000 people. 17th Street in East Village and the immediate surrounding downtown area are known as San Diego's Skid Row. Hundreds of homeless encampments overflowing with trash have lined the streets there for years, until today. KPBS reporter Susan Murphy has more.
The tents and tarps that stretched across entire city blocks are gone. Carts are empty. And the homeless people, many seem to have disappeared. Cleanup crews are sweeping up belongings left behind. Homeless advocate Michael McConnell has been observing and documenting the major transformation.
But where are these homeless people go?
They disappeared. From here they did.
He says police and large caravans have been conducting major enforcements.
As far as I can tell, this has been a phased approach with the knockout punch in the last 2 weeks to really try to get rid of the tents, disperse people, so there's not large encampments.
Homeless people say their tents used to be tolerated from 9 at night to 6 in the morning, but now they've been told they can never set up their tents. McConnell wonders if it's part of the city's response to the hepatitis A outbreak.
Are they thinking this is going to make that better? Is there a chance that this is going to make that worse?
He says he's noticed increased tension among the homeless population.
It almost seems like something's about to boil over.
The city recently announced plans to house homeless people in 3 large industrial tents, but those aren't expected to be up until at least December. Susan Murphy, KPBS News.
Susan asked San Diego police for comment. So far, they have not responded. Council members demanded more action today in a letter signed by council members Myrtle Cole, Barbara Bree, David Alvarez, and Georgette Gomez. They called on city leaders to develop a ballot measure focused on long-term funding for San Diego's homeless issue. And in the interim, they wanted the mayor to redirect $5 million that was supposed to be used for a special election to accelerate efforts to fight homelessness. A disability advocacy group is questioning a San Diego parking law for recreational vehicles. Current ordinances state certain larger vehicles, like RVs, cannot be parked on city streets overnight. KPBS's Matt Hoffman spoke with a San Diegan who has been affected by the rule.
Where to go when we have to be off the public streets? Oh my gosh, it can drive you insane.
Lakeside native Michael Bloom has been living out of his camper for the last 11 years.
You know, it's a wreck and it needs some love.
This spot in Ocean Beach was where he used to sleep. But now,
I won't take a deep breath until I look real good at take a look at the front windshield to see if I got a ticket.
That's because in 2013, the San Diego City Council changed overnight parking laws. RVs and certain oversized vehicles can no longer be on city streets from 2 to 6 a.m. unless you have a permit, which requires a physical address to obtain.
It took me from behind because I had no idea it was coming. And boy, it came with a vengeance.
Bloom received several tickets for parking his RV overnight.
There was at least 15.
Each one costing more than $100.
Not being able to eat or, buy gas, it's just, they don't realize how big a cut that is on anything that you want to do.
Bloom says he's legally disabled and relies on disability checks to get by every month.
Disposable income is just a big joke when you're homeless.
Current mayor and former city councilman Kevin Faulkner brought the ordinance to city council in 2012. He claimed oversized vehicles on city streets took up valuable parking spaces and blocked view corridors.
You have to have known what it felt like to be homeless, basically to empathize with somebody they're on their knees, they're just trying to stay out of trouble. In a way, it has to be tough because the people that are the renegades and that dump their trash in their sewer and stuff like that, that can't be stood for.
Now Bloom is working with Disability Rights California. The group is trying to stop the ticketing and get a reasonable modification under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But so far, the city hasn't taken action.
I don't have any place to go to, anymore. So I love San Diego, and I hope to be here and participate. But I almost feel like I wouldn't want to be alive if I didn't have a camper.
Now Bloom spends his nights trying to avoid detection and the fines that follow. He says he knows a couple spots where police don't actively patrol, but that could change at any time. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
Immigrants' rights advocates are speaking out against what they call the inhumane treatment of pregnant women held in immigration detention centers. The American Civil Liberties Union and others filed a complaint today with the Department of Homeland Security. They're calling for the investigation of cases involving 10 women held at facilities in California, Texas, and Washington state. According to the complaint, one of the women suffered a miscarriage while in custody. As construction begins on the prototypes of President Trump's border wall, San Diego County supervisors have passed new rules about protests near the construction zone. The prototypes are being built in Otay Mesa. The new rules passed today say people who attend rallies or protest near the area are not allowed to bring anything that can be used as a weapon. That includes things like knives, baseball bats, pepper spray, and sticks and poles. The new ordinance cites violence at protest in Charlottesville and in Berkeley as examples of why such rules are needed. Republican leaders decided today not to hold a vote on the GOP's latest attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. There wasn't enough yes votes to get the bill approved. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says Republicans aren't giving up on getting rid of Obamacare, but they need to focus on other things like tax reform. The setback marks the end for the latest drive to overturn the health care law, a promise the GOP has made to voters for 7 years. Aid shipments to Puerto Rico have stepped up as more ports and airports are able to handle ships and air traffic. National Guard and private tanker trucks filled up with badly needed fuel to distribute throughout the island. President Trump has been criticized in recent days for his tweets that focus more on the NFL and less on the devastation brought by Hurricane Maria. But Governor Ricardo Rossello says he's confident the president cares about Puerto Rico.
I really have been somewhat absent of social media, so I can only speak to what he has personally said to me, and I can guarantee to everybody that's listening, the president has called, has pledged his support, and we have an expectation of talking to him again today about the next path that will be taken.
The president the island faces months of recovery and potentially billions of dollars in costs to restore infrastructure and services. A congressional committee heard testimony today about finding interim and long-term storage sites for nuclear waste. KPBS reporter Allison St. John says the testimony include the need to prioritize waste from decommissioned nuclear plants, such as San Onofre.
San Onofre's 3.5 million pounds of spent fuel is just a fraction of the radioactive nuclear waste at 17 reactor sites being decommissioned around the country. David Victor is chair of Edison's Citizens Engagement Panel, which meets regularly to monitor the decommissioning of San Onofre. He addressed the House Oversight and Government Reform Subcommittee on Energy and the Environment today and responded to a question about the safety concerns in the community.
People are seeing the rest of the site being dismantled, and they don't understand why it is that the spent fuel is stuck there. And they're really angry about that because the deal that was made was we paid the federal government to remove it, and it's not being removed. And that's a palpable anger and sentiment in the community.
Victor said the federal government agreed more than 30 years ago to come up with a plan for long-term storage of spent fuel from the nation's nuclear plants, but has failed to meet any of its own deadlines. When and if interim and long-term storage sites are approved, Victor said spent fuel from decommissioned plants like San Onofre should take priority over older spent fuel at plants that are still operating. Allison St. John, KPBS News.
A former San Diego State basketball assistant coach has been arrested on federal bribery charges. Authorities say Tony Bland is one of 4 assistant coaches caught taking thousands of dollars in bribes to steer college stars towards certain sports agents and financial advisors.
The picture painted by the charges brought today is not a pretty one. Coaches at some of the nation's top programs soliciting and accepting cash bribes. Managers and financial advisors circling blue chip prospects like coyotes.
The other coaches charged are from the University of Arizona, Auburn University, and Oklahoma State. Bland was an assistant coach at SDSU from 2009 to 2013 before moving on to USC. Federal authorities say the FBI has been investigating corruption in the NAA since 2015. Things are heating up in San Diego this week. Erin Calandra has more in tonight's forecast.
Well, it's pretty nice here in California, above average temperatures by a couple degrees at least, and no wet weather here in our forecast. It's going to be like this for the next couple days. What you will notice is winds. We're going to have some gusty winds throughout the passes and also the deserts, below the passes, I should say, through the mountains and deserts for the next couple of days. Through Saturday, really, you should be aware of that. Otherwise, it's going to be nice. 63 degrees tonight for our temperature, partly cloudy skies. In Oceanside tonight, 54, Poway 57, Borrego Springs 64 degrees, and Alpine 54 for our overnight lows. We do have a high fire risk here on Wednesday. That is because of those gusty winds and also low humidity, so certainly could be a problem here in Southern California. We can see it's still a bit cool to the north and east of us, but all of California is really warming up. San Francisco, temperatures in the 80s, so well above average temperatures for them throughout the week. Luckily, we will see a change here pretty soon. So Oceanside, 81 degrees tomorrow for the high temperature. Poway, 92. Ramona, also 92 degrees. San Diego, nice and sunny conditions, 80 degrees. You may have also noticed a few less clouds in the morning. That's because we have this offshore flow, keeping all the clouds kind of out in the ocean and giving us more sunshine throughout the day and also those morning hours. We are keeping our eye on Maria. Maria is a Category 1 hurricane spinning out in the Atlantic. We are seeing some very rough surf all along the East Coast and also some impacts in the Outer Banks. We are seeing gusts up to 50 miles per hour. Some flooding is a concern, but Maria is expected to track to the east and really not impact much of the East Coast for much longer. Here we are in the coast. Lots of sunshine, temperatures in the 80s, dropping down to the 70s by the weekend. Inland, we are in the 90s, so certainly warming up, but then back down to the 80s and sunny. In the mountains, we're in the 70s all week long, so nice conditions. Some of those lows are in the 40s, so that's a nice break. And in the deserts, we are in the double digits, reaching nearly 100 by Friday and sunny. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra.
The Alfred Olango Foundation was created after the police shooting death last year of a 38-year-old refugee. It was founded by Olango's brother to advocate for training to help de-escalate police encounters and ideally save lives. I sat down with Apollo Olango to hear more about his hopes for the foundation.
At the end of the day, I really do believe that he shouldn't have been dead and he should still be alive. Things could have happened differently.
It's that belief that guides Apollo Olango.
A lot of the questions that I was asking, such as why is my brother dead? Did he have to be? All those questions seem to push towards taking some sort of action,
leading to the development of a foundation in his brother's honor.
There is a need for an entity within the civil rights movement that provides information and direction.
What questions did you have and what answers were you receiving that the public hasn't heard?
Why was it justified? What is the legal aspect that allows it to be justified?
Apollo Olango says growing up, his brother, about 6 years his senior, led the way.
He's always been a guide in life. Starting off, we can go way back to the refugee camp and even before then.
The Ilonggos moved from Uganda to San Diego as refugees in 1991. Apollo says Alfred had a way of making everyone laugh, making losing him to violence all the more painful.
It was difficult. As a family, we had never really dealt with a loss like that. Miraculously, out of everything we had been through, bombs exploding, landmines all over the place.
The goal of the Alfred Olango Foundation, listed on its website, include advocating for police training, focused on de-escalation techniques and preservation of life. Apollo says leading up to his death, his brother was emotionally in pieces over the death of his longtime friend.
Someone that is dealing with a mental breakdown is not going to be able to respond to whatever orders that you're barking out. And with that understanding, there should be some kind of technique applied that de-escalates that particular situation.
In the last year, Ilonggo has shared Alfred's story and the goals of the foundation with community groups, politicians, and Hollywood personalities, with large platforms to raise awareness.
It's not easy. I'm still grieving. It's difficult to go to sleep every night knowing that your brother died in the pain that he died in, that he didn't have to.
Olango also wants to develop research initiatives to study current laws and policies regarding law enforcement to advocate for reform.
It's the laws that justify the actions. So to have an in-depth understanding of the laws that justify these actions and as to why. If enough people feel about a law as if it's unjust or something is incorrect with it, every law is a living document nearly, and it can be amended.
Apollo says his brother, who always encouraged him, would be proud of the Alfred Olango Foundation and its efforts to turn his memory into a catalyst for change.
I hope Alfred Olango is remembered as someone that sadly lost his life in a situation that he wasn't supposed to, but in doing so was able to give something to a people.
KPBS will have more coverage tomorrow on the Alfred Olango shooting in El Cajon 1 year ago. The incident sparked a national debate and generated tension between community members and the people sworn to protect them.
Good cops are frustrated when something like this happens, and without knowing all the pieces, without being in that split second. You're talking a split second of time. And what would we all do in those situations? What decisions would be made?
Tune in tomorrow night on KPBS Evening Edition for special coverage on what's changed and what hasn't 1 year after the death of Alfred Olango.
I'm Judy Woodruff on the next NewsHour. Staying healthy at school. A look at a push to get more kids vaccinated. That's Tuesday on the PBS NewsHour.
Tuvan throat singers do things with their voices that seem impossible. They can sing high and low notes at the same time. In tonight's SciTech report, a speech pathologist who's looking inside the human vocal tract to see how these talented singers create their signature sound.
If you've never heard of Tuvan throat singing or seen it performed, the first time that you do, you might think that there's some audio trickery at work. But the singers in the band Alash produce transcendent sounds like these solely through the mastery of bioacoustics. Tuvan throat singer Badi Dorju Ondar speaks softly off stage.
I start early. 4 or 5 years old.
You're about to see the first child from Tuva to perform here in the United States. For those of you who don't know, Tuva is a country located between Siberia and Mongolia. And the people there have this uncanny way of singing two notes at the same time.
Yes, first time, you know, like not heard tickle.
So what's Badi's secret?
Yes, I listening and try more. Yes, every day I try.
It's a bit more complicated than that. Just ask the band's manager, Sean Quirk.
So the way we explain it to school kids is that every time we make a musical note, there's lots of notes that are already there. Those are called overtones. And normally we don't hear them as separate notes because they're all blended together. But a Tuvan is squeezing for some of those overtones to get louder and the rest to go away.
To find out exactly what they're squeezing, you have to look inside. This is Dr. Aaron Johnson, a speech pathologist at the NYU Langone Voice Center. And while he doesn't throat sing, he can reveal how a baritone can achieve soprano-pitched overtones.
We have two pieces of tissue here in the larynx called the vocal folds, and the air then makes those vocal folds vibrate. Good, so those are the vocal folds vibrating.
The speed of which changes the pitch.
Good, and now super low. Good, and so now we're starting to see a little bit how things compress during the throat singing and those low notes. We get a really small tube down there.
But that's not all that changes.
By changing the shape of my tongue and my lips, I then create different resonances. The soft palate is moving around, the height of the larynx, we can see the larynx moving up and down as well, all to change the shape of that tube.
Dramatically reducing unwanted frequencies while strengthening others. At the same time,
that space that's inside the larynx, just above the vocal folds, is a very tight constriction. It's probably what is amplifying those high harmonics.
Essentially, the Tuvan singer is using their throat a little like a sound mixer.
By creating different constrictions, you're lifting the slider up on certain frequencies and lowering the slider on other ones.
And by using audio imaging tools, you can actually see the two distinct harmonics that are produced by a throat singer.
And if I go you can see that we have these different harmonics that are being amplified.
But with the throat singer,
we have one resonance that's down here that's staying pretty constant. And then by adjusting the length and shape of the vocal tract, a singer can amplify certain harmonics.
Throat singers also squeeze and vibrate different regions of their larynx to produce that low, raspy style singing, known as kargara.
These pink tissues, kind of bulges above the true vocal folds, are the ventricular folds, also called the false vocal folds. Those aren't designed to vibrate in a regular way, so you're getting some irregular vibrations with those pieces of tissue that causes that scratchiness, that noise.
But just because you can physically produce these sounds doesn't mean that you can master them.
For Body and IN and INL, this is just the thing that they grew up in. You know, it's so deeply tied up with culture and with the way Tuvan people view the world, and that is a worldview that is built on a long, long history of being a nomad. That means you're very attentive to the cycles of nature, you're attentive to the sounds of nature. People say, oh, it's in our blood, and it's like, yeah, that's magical. Don't get me with that non-scientific stuff. But I feel there is a case to be made for at least something like that.
A soul to the music that just can't be taught.
You can find more stories like that one on SciTech Now, Sunday nights at 5:30 here on KPBS. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening.